Hello, friends. My name is BJ Owens. I'm the Dean of Trinity Cathedral in downtown Cleveland, Ohio, and we are blessed to be joined by Bishop Jeffrey Rowthorn. We're talking this month about giving and about stewardship, and we've gone in a little bit of a different direction this year, and we're rooting our stewardship theme on a hymn. And we've drawn a line from a favorite hymn of mine, which is "Let Every Life Be Touched by Grace," as something not only to lead us to think about generosity and our response to God's goodness, but not just about giving financially. It's about how we see every life touched by the generous grace of God, and both in our responses and how we live our lives and how we practice our faith. And so you can imagine what a great treat and pleasure it is to have Bishop Rowthorn with us, because he wrote the hymn. I first met Bishop Rowthorn when I was at Berkeley at Yale many years ago, about 20, I don't want to do the math, but it's been it was 20 years ago. And learned a little bit about some of his other hymn writing, some of his other work. But first, Bishop, if I could say just a little bit about you. Bishop Rowthorn has been a priest for a good while. He served as a parish priest, then served two seminaries, Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and then Berkeley Divinity School and the Institute of Sacred Music at Yale after that, and that's my alma mater. Before serving as a bishop suffragan in the Diocese of Connecticut, and then served as the bishop in charge of the Convocation of Episcopal Churches in Europe. And I think you were just completing that time when I met you, when you were paying a class. I think you did a class for us at the seminary. And so, Bishop, thank you for joining us here in Cleveland. I know we're here by Zoom. I'll say just a little bit about us. Trinity is the oldest church in Cleveland, Ohio. And then we've been the Cathedral Church of the diocese for about 120 years now. And the cathedral itself, which I hope you will visit someday, was completed in 1907. So glad you can be with us by Zoom. Welcome.
Thank you. And one thing you couldn't have mentioned in my mini biography, 50 years ago, how many years ago was it? Yes, 50 years ago, I celebrated my priestly ordination this week.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness. How does one celebrate a 50th anniversary of ordination?
By just being thankful, I think.
Indeed. Well, blessings. And that's just so wonderful. And I'm so glad we can celebrate with you and share this with you.
Well, no, I'm fascinated that you chose Creating God Your Fingers Trace, because that was the very first hymn I wrote. And if I might take a moment just to tell you the background to it, it's rather curious.
Please do.
I was teaching a course with Richard French, who was one of the people who came up from Union Seminary to Yale to start the Institute of Sacred Music. And one of the things we asked the students to do was, if they were musical by background and attached to the music school, we wanted them to set one of the psalm paraphrases to a tune of their composing. Okay. But if they were in the divinity school, we wanted them to take a psalm and to write a psalm paraphrase of that psalm, so that it looks like a hymn and is sung as a hymn. And they took that assignment, and I started to drive home, and I was stopped in my tracks, although I didn't actually stop the car. And I realized I hadn't done that assignment ever myself. And that seemed to be inappropriate. The teacher should at least have done what he asked the students to do. So I wrote a psalm paraphrase, and what we have before us today. And we sang it, and then it was disposed of. I didn't think of it again. 5 years later, I got a letter from the Hymn Society of America to say that I had won a competition with that hymn. Wow. It's quite nice to win a competition that you don't even enter for.
Well, exactly. And I love getting a letter saying that it happened.
So that's the curious history of this of what's attracted your attention. But now tell me, what you've mentioned one thing. What else attracted you to the hymn in terms of your plan for stewardship this year?
I think three things really attracted us. One, and this goes to what it means to be the church in, well, we hoped that we would be in post-pandemic season when we were talking about this, but we're still in it. But we're finding that as a church, it's a moment of rebuilding and recreation, and how do we participate and come alongside God's creation. The hymn has a wonderful co-creation theme to it. Which to me is very much what giving is all about, because when we give, we are bringing our gifts alongside the gifts of God and helping to be a part of creating something new. And so this was a hymn that very much touched on that. And then as I spent more time with it, I love the many names for God that you use. That's really important to us at Trinity as a way of really opening up different facets of who God is: creating God, sustaining God, indwelling God. And then finally, as our team was planning it, we came across this one phrase that's in the last verse, which is, until we see you face to face. Let every life be touched by grace until we see you face by face. And until we see you face to face. And we couldn't help but notice that we've been spending the last 18 months in many ways not face to face. And so that immediacy takes on a meaning that we've never had before, because we now know what it's like to not be face to face with one another. And it just heightens the importance of what that means to be with one another face to face, but then ultimately being drawn into God's presence and seeing God face to face. And so to come to this idea of let every life be touched by grace, which I want to go a little deeper into that in just a moment, but and yet it draws us really, really in quite a deep way into our church's teaching and our theology and what it means to be transformed by grace.
Well, it was written before the word Zoom meant anything to me, or probably, but we are indebted to the pandemic, if I may venture to say that, in one sense at least, that it has brought us in a far deeper way face to face with the members of churches. And you'll probably have this in the Diocese of Ohio too, that people who've moved away from the church they've been in members of for many years suddenly find themselves in Buenos Aires, Argentina, or in somewhere in Oregon or in Connecticut, able to worship with the people they left behind.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we returned to in-person worship over the summer, about midway through the summer. And one of the things that surprised me the most was in the beginning. Two things. One, Bishop, we suddenly adjust to having two congregations in one place. We have the in-person congregation, and now we have a congregation of the same size worshiping with us over the live stream. And that may not be permanent, but at least that's kind of where we are now. But the other thing is we started seeing people who were new to the life of Trinity coming in because they saw us through an online presence, which I would have never predicted. And it's a nice moment of grace in the midst of something that's actually quite challenging and quite difficult.
And we have in St. Anne's Old Lyme in Connecticut, where we are members, and myself, we had the experience of midweek outdoor worship in a lovely memorial garden that we have at the church.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so powerful that the members of the church who attended came not only in September, but in February. Every Wednesday we sat and shivered to the glory of God, but it was something that we could never have contemplated were it not for the demands placed upon us by COVID.
I would say, having lived in Connecticut and having lived in Cleveland, there is a climate. The climate is quite similar. And so I like that. We have also sat and shivered for the glory of God. And we've also sat and baked in the hot light of the summer for the glory of God. And so everybody got a great straw hat to get them through the summer. And I certainly did too. Tell me a little bit, Bishop, what grace means to you. As we talk about, as we're really framing our whole campaign around let every life be touched by grace. Grace is it's a word that can mean a lot, and it's a word that can carry a lot. And I wonder what grace means to you.
I think going back to what I was saying about COVID obliging us to worship in new ways, the goodness of God became evident in that most unlikely of settings. That we had a feeling that we were strengthened by God's grace working through our neighbors. And we would never perhaps have appreciated that timely intervention of God in our lives. Mm-hmm. So grace is a very precious thing. And perhaps we took it more carefully and appreciatively in this season than in the past.
We certainly, we don't take anything for granted, without a doubt. And I love that, the idea of a timely intervention, a moment when we see through the charity and the openness of our neighbors, in a moment that we might not have seen otherwise, a wonderful glimpse of God, a wonderful glimpse of God. Well, something that I noticed also in one of your, we could take your hymn verse by verse, and I am curious. You talk about creating God. There's a sense of creation. I see environmental stewardship in here, redeeming God. You talk about reconciliation and healing, redeeming God, your arms embrace, all now despise for creed or race, let peace descending like a dove, make known on earth your healing love, which is, I know this hymn was written decades ago, but that is at the heart of the movement today. I hear Bishop Curry talking about the Jesus movement. I hear the church speaking in the public square as we're talking about racial healing and reconciliation, right here in this hymn, naming God in the heart of all of it.
Well, I obviously didn't have Trinity Cathedral, Cleveland, Ohio in my mind when I was writing the text, but it was meant to approach the doctrine and experience of the Trinity in a fresh way. Mm-hmm. So instead of using nouns, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, I thought it was important to use present active participles, that God is always redeeming, always indwelling, always creating. And I think that gives a new sense of richness as we tackle the call to worship God and to set God forth before the world. So I'm glad that you can use it as Trinity Cathedral, Cleveland.
It is particularly Trinitarian, and at a moment when our wider church and the cathedral itself is really looking carefully at the words we use for God and the words we use for the people of God. And the hymn does such a wonderful job of bridging that, both our Trinitarian being, while also opening up our language for God, which is so important to us. I know that when one place where I see grace firsthand, and I'm sure you've experienced this many times, you create a sermon and you sort of go in one direction, and you hear the music that someone else has chosen, and it's precisely in the exact same place without having any planning beforehand. You realize that the grace has been there in all the things that led to worship coming about. I think I see that grace in what led to you creating this hymn as it was, and how we are hearing it in this present moment. And I'd like to think that's what happens with all great hymns.
Well, certainly it happens too with preaching. I've preached a sort of mediocre sermon by my reckoning, and someone comes up afterwards and says, that was exactly what I needed to hear. That's exactly where I was standing in the need of prayer.
That's
whatever
right.
it might be. So, and also I was very concerned to try to go round the obstacle presented by the cry for inclusive language. People were stumbling over the maleness of language. And I thought if I addressed the hymn directly to God and used present participles with the ever active God, we would get around the problem of inclusive language without drawing attention, perhaps, to that.
And I think that's exactly right in that naming the obstacle, the response to the challenge here in this moment was coming up with a better language for what this hymn needed to express.
And I hope it achieved it. But it's amazing how when you write a hymn, here it's 4 stanzas. There are 4 stanzas long meter. There's not much space to move in a hymn of that kind.
That's right.
But it's possible to touch many things, and you've mentioned about the embracing of all humanity by God. That's one thing I was very concerned to put before people. Also, looking at the marvels of the creation and the universe which we're becoming more and more aware of. That's possible to say something modestly about that. Mm-hmm. So it's a teaching hymn, I suppose, but I didn't want people to be thinking that they were being taught as they were singing.
But, well, isn't that the best way to teach, though, is, sneak it in so that people aren't expecting it?
Exactly.
Well, we're the ones receiving the teaching as those who are hearing the hymn. And I love a hymn that continues to teach me the more that I hear it.
Well, one of the things I've wondered, you may not do this, probably not. I don't know many churches or any who that do, but I have a feeling that when one introduces a new text, I hope it's being sung to a tune people know to start with, so they're not flummoxed by new words and new music. Mm-hmm. But also not so preoccupied with the new text that they don't really hear it because they're attending to it in a rather punctilious way. I think it would be wonderful if in introducing a new hymn, not only does one need to hear the music and to take it in and sing to it, but people need to hear the actual text. And I think if you have a person with a fine voice who knows how to recite, to mm-hmm. read, I think it would be wonderful, and we've had this experience recently, in fact, to listen to a new text and hear what is being said, which is often rather demanding, but also mm-hmm. very moving.
Mm-hmm. We have several different styles of worship at Trinity. And we've been able to sing, so far we've done the hymn several times and in different settings, as well as recording a video with our choir singing. So we're trying to explore it through a number of different hymn settings, so that we can hear, our ears can hear it in different ways.
That which allows the poetry, which is some of our texts in the Hymnal 1982 and so on, are really superb. But I was thinking particularly of Robert Bridges' translation of a German text. All my hope on God is founded. He doth still my strength renew. Do you know that one?
I do know it, yes.
Yes, I think it's a beautiful text, and I would long for people to hear it read rather than to be stumbled over because it's unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm. I'll test your memory a little bit, and it's okay if you want to pass on this question. It is a very tight hymn. It's almost like a haiku in how the economy of words, and that of course creates a lot of discipline in terms of how do you communicate a lot in just a few words. Did any verses not make it? Do you remember anything that's on the cutting room floor that did not make it into this final hymn?
Can I have that question again?
Sure. Were there any verses 5 or 6 that looked like it was going to make it in the hymn but didn't quite make it? Didn't quite fit?
As far as I was concerned, as the writer.
Okay.
Not as far as the hymn committee was concerned. No, I very rarely have to put a stanza to death. Well, once it's been written, I play with it a great deal, but I can't remember just abandoning. I would take it as a challenge to see that nothing got abandoned. But no, I can't say that anything was there, though you could well suggest something that might be there.
Well, I think it would take a lot of work to come up with something to add to it, but perhaps I maybe not everyone, perhaps not everyone knows that a lot of the hymns in our texts, in our hymnal, were poems or have a long history before they made it to our hymnal, and there are often verses that aren't there that we don't know about. And that's why I was just wondering that. But your creative, that's also getting a little bit at your own creative process and what led to this.
Well, at least the committee charged with preparing the text that will finally appear in the new hymn, whenever it comes, they would, I suppose, write or say, we want the hymn, but we don't particularly want stanza 4. We don't think it's helpful.
Okay.
But I've been fortunate. My little children that I've given birth to as a hymn have also survived.
What is it like to be the writer of a hymn and to be a priest and a bishop, to find yourself in a congregation and you hear your hymn sung, and let's assume for a moment that they didn't realize that they were offering the hymn that you had written. What does that feel like?
Well, it's humbling, and I mean that seriously. It is humbling.
I believe that.
Rather astonishing. And in fact, I'm spoiled in many ways, because I think of Queen Elizabeth saying to Prince Philip, when the national anthem is played, they're playing our song, Philip. Well, it's like that when Lord, you give the Great Commission is sung again and again and again. And when the bishop comes, partly they like the hymn, partly it suits the occasion, partly they want to please the bishop. But it is very moving to hear it.
I bet it's really special, and a real occasion of grace as well.
Yes.
Because when we write, when we create, we are listening for the Spirit, and I think when we at our best, we are vessels for something beyond us.
Yeah, well, just as we were talking earlier about a sermon that one's not very impressed by oneself, speaking powerfully to people in the congregation. I think it's true when someone says, not just to please the bishop or the hymn writer, but that was a wonderful text. I really enjoyed singing it. And that's as great a reward as one could want.
It's one of the gifts when we offer hymns, liturgy, anything that we offer, when people respond that way, it's really humbling, isn't it?
Yes.
It really is. It really is. Because I feel like we get to share a great treasure that we experience in our lives, and we get to invite people to the same banquet, is what it feels like to me.
Well, what I would urge you to do, if you've not done this, but taking Lord, you give the Great Commission, which is to a familiar meter, plenty of options. I've asked people to sing the 5 verses, each to a different says 8/7/8/7 double meter. So they have to switch from
in the hymn. They're going changing verses.
Yes, changing five tunes for the 5 verses, and then I say, this is a teacher at work, I suppose. You are actually the hymn committee for the Episcopal Church, and you have to pick that. You've picked this text. That's not up for grabs, but you have to pick a tune out of the 5 you've sung, and say which one you will include in the hymnal. And I find it really intrigues people. Some people know that I wrote it to Abbots Lee, and so they slip in and they have the right answer. And I say, no,
my goodness,
there's not a right answer. You have to decide, because people hear words quite differently if they're sung to a different tune. But it's fun. Gets people immersed in an activity they may never have contemplated doing.
I don't think so. Well, our director of music is Todd Wilson. So I'll look at the camera and say, Todd Wilson and our wonderful choir, you have now been given the Great Commission to give this a try and see what it does and see what it does. We are blessed at Trinity to have just exquisite music. I feel so fortunate to be here and to be able to hear wonderful hymns like the ones we're talking about, done in different ways. It's such a gift, and I hope so. I hope perhaps this pandemic moment has allowed us to share this beyond our immediate congregation, as more and more folks have been able to participate in what we have to offer.
And it could be maybe a distracting from the intention you have in using this creating God text, but you've got 4 stanzas there, and there are plenty of great long meter tunes. So you could try with the same exercise, but then you may be distracting people from what you really want them to
be. We can distract as long as we're having fun singing and learning from it. It's not a distraction at all.
Sure.
Well, Bishop, this has been such a treat, and I'm so grateful for your time. I will just remind everybody watching and give first of all thank everybody for your continued generosity and giving that has continued throughout this very difficult season of pandemic. I can't say thank you enough. It's just been humbling to see. But I also want to remind you that we're concluding our stewardship campaign for this coming year at the end of the month, October 31st. So if you have not had a chance to prayerfully consider if you're able to pledge in the coming year, we hope you will. So thank you for those of you as you prayerfully consider giving for the coming year. Bishop Rowthorn, thank you for your hymn. Thank you for your ministry, and thank you for your time. This has just been a wonderful pleasure to talk to you about something very special.
Well, I'm honored and grateful for the invitation, and I hope the campaign, the stewardship campaign, goes well, and I hope you pick the right tune to sing this.
No pressure. Just get the right tune.
On condition you tell me which one you did pick.
We will. Oh, we promise we will.
Well, bless you in your singing and in your giving.
Thank you, Bishop.
Time Creating God, your fingers trace the bold designs of farthest space. Let sun and moon and stars and light and what lies hidden praise your might. Sustaining God, your hands uphold earth's mysteries known or yet untold. Let waters fragile burn within, enabling life proclaim your care. Redeeming God, your arms embrace all now despised for creed or race. Let peace descending like a dove make known on earth your healing.